Welcome, my name's James Bryan, author and founder of Easy Online Divorce, and today we're going to talk about adultery and should you use it as a grounds for your divorce. Adultery is one of 5 reasons or grounds to get a divorce in England and Wales. Adultery is defined precisely by law, even though most people think it has much wider applications. So what is adultery? In legal terms, adultery is when a married man or a woman has sexual intercourse with another man or woman of the opposite sex. Not only that, when you find out about the adultery, you must find it intolerable to continue to live with the person because of it. Divorce on the grounds of adultery can only take place with a married person and someone of the opposite sex. So under current law, people in a civil partnership can't use adultery as a grounds for divorce. So what is not adultery? So it's probably basically everything else that you thought it was. So flirting, sexting, kissing, all of those things don't count as adultery. The only thing that is adultery is sexual intercourse with someone of the opposite sex. So when should you not use adultery? Well, you should never use adultery if you think that your partner is going to deny it or change their mind. Because the problem with using adultery is that if they change their mind, you have to prove that it took place. And often when I speak to people, they say, well, yes, I can prove it because they're with that person now, and oh yes, I can prove it because I've seen the messages. To prove it, you have to actually prove that sexual intercourse took place while you were married. So it can be very difficult, very expensive, and if there's any risk whatsoever that the person's going to deny it, then you should use something else. So how can you divorce using grounds of adultery? Well, the first thing to remember is that it has to be the behaviour of your spouse. So it's your spouse that's committed the adultery, not yourself. Often we have people planning for the divorce and using adultery, and it's actually their own adultery that they're trying to divorce on. You can't do that. It's got to be the adultery of your partner. They have to have had sex with someone of the opposite sex, and you have to file within 6 months of first finding out about the adultery. If you leave it any longer, the court won't permit it, because the second part of adultery is being intolerable to continue to live with that person. So you've got to make sure that you file for divorce within 6 months of finding out. As with unreasonable behaviour, the best course of action, if possible, is to discuss the adultery with your partner and agree what you're going to write, what's going to go into the divorce petition. Because what happens is that you file for the divorce, your partner receives the divorce petition saying that you want to divorce them on the grounds of adultery, and then it'll ask them if they agree to it, yes or no. Now you want them to agree to it, because if they don't, you then have to provide more evidence, which is going to cost you more money and take more time. You don't have to go into a huge amount of detail. You just have to write that your partner has committed adultery. You write when you found out about it, where it took place, and that's it. Top tip. So when you're applying for divorce and using adultery, there's an option to add the name of the person who your spouse had the affair with, known as the co-respondent. My top tip is not to do this. Nobody will see the documentation. There'll be no benefit to you whatsoever of naming and shaming the person. And I know that you know quite often people want to do this because they feel that they kind of, they're going to get back at the other person somehow and make life difficult for them. But the reality is the only person they're going to make it difficult for is themselves, because another set of documents would go to the co-respondent, the person who had the affair with, and ask them if the affair took place as well. And this can only slow things down and make things more difficult and more expensive for you. So the top tip is not to bother naming and shaming and including the other person in there. Frequently asked questions. Does adultery affect a divorce settlement? Now this is massive. It comes up as well with unreasonable behaviour as well, and the kind of logic is I didn't want this marriage to end, this person's done this and the marriage has ended, and now my life's changed, and we might not have the same lifestyle as what we had before, and all this kind of stuff, which is completely understandable. But the bottom line is adultery does not affect the financial settlement. The only things that affect the financial settlement would be situations that involve fraud. So the judges don't look at it and say, okay, this person's been really bad, they've had an affair, they're going to have to give X amount of money or this, that and the other. It doesn't work like that whatsoever. So it doesn't affect any financial settlement. Will the details of my affair be made public? Again, big question. Everyone asks it. The answer is no. They're not going to be made public whatsoever. The only people that see the details within the documents would be their court staff. If you used a company like mine, our team would see that as well. And this comes back to the name and shame of the person that your spouse had the affair with. No one's going to see it. It's not going to affect that person in any way whatsoever. Are there any timelines when a divorcing for adultery? Absolutely, 100%. You must file for divorce within 6 months of knowing about the adultery. If you leave it longer, then you can't use adultery as the grounds for your divorce. Adultery is sexual intercourse with someone of the opposite sex, and you find it intolerable to continue to live with that person. So you must file for divorce within 6 months. So what do you do in a situation where 6 months has passed? So for example, you could have found out about the adultery, you could have decided that you were going to make a go of it, and you've been trying to make a go of it, and things have just not worked out, and the 6 months has passed. What can you do then? Well, you can't file for divorce using grounds of adultery, but what you can use is unreasonable behaviour, and you can see another video of ours that explains how to use unreasonable behaviour. And then the other alternative is 2 years separation with consent, but obviously you have to wait a long time for that compared to using unreasonable behaviour. Big question that we get is, my spouse won't admit to adultery, what do I do? Or it's people file for divorce using adultery and then the spouse changes their mind. We always recommend that you have a really strong, hard think about using adultery before you use it, because adultery is a highly emotive situation, and time again people have used adultery for the divorce only to find that the spouse changes their mind when they receive the divorce papers. And there can be loads of reasons why that happens, but in my experience, there's a very high probability that someone will change their mind and not agree to the adultery, or at least just delay it. It just sits there before they make a decision and respond to the court. So if your spouse won't admit to adultery, or if there is a risk of them defending it, the best thing that you can do is use unreasonable behaviour. The beauty of unreasonable behaviour is when you file for unreasonable behaviour, and the adultery can be part of that unreasonable behaviour, but the beauty of it is that if your spouse defends against unreasonable behaviour, they have to prove that the allegations didn't take place, which means that they have to pay a court fee straight away, £245, and then take time to write and defend against the allegations. As a consequence, defending against unreasonable behaviour is very, 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 very rare. So as opposed to adultery, where all I have to do is say I disagree with it, and then it comes back to you then have to provide the evidence that it took place. So unreasonable behaviour is the way to go if you feel that your spouse is not going to admit to it, or if they outrightly are saying they're not going to admit to it. Take a look at our video on unreasonable behaviour, because it explains how you can use it in more detail. I hope I've made it really clear what the risks are of using adultery, and how proven adultery can be very difficult and expensive and time consuming. If you have any questions about adultery or any of the other grounds for divorce, please comment below or send us an email, contact@easyonlinedivorce.co.uk. Please like and subscribe to this channel so you get updates on when our next videos are getting released. The next video is going to be about separation, 2 years separation and 5 years separation, and how you can use them for the grounds for divorce. Best of luck and thanks for watching.